Julian Lennon. You won't believe what happened next. A lifetime of quiet was blown open by a single confession. Just a few raw words from Julian Lennon, now in his 60s, that made the world stop and listen. They weren't poetic. They weren't dressed up. They were honest, the kind of honesty that leaves a mark. And once you hear the story behind those words, you'll realize this isn't a headline about rock royalty. It's a human story about family, hurt, and the long, stubborn road to peace. From the outside, being John Lennon's son sounds like a golden ticket. Cameras flash, doors swing open, the surname does the talking. But if you zoom in, really zoom in, you see a kid who wanted something painfully ordinary. A steady home, a present dad, and a life that didn't feel like a museum tour. When John Lennon walked out for a new love, Yoko Ono, the fairy tale shattered. There was no grand speech, no careful goodbye, just absence. Cynthia Lennon, Julian's mum, did the heavy lifting, holding down work, selling things that mattered, making rent, making meals, gluing together a life everyone assumed was already perfect. Meanwhile, the name Lennon followed young Julian Lennon into school, like a spotlight he never asked for. Kids pointed, teachers made assumptions. He's famous, he'll be fine. But fame doesn't stop loneliness from creeping in. Fame doesn't patch a cracked heart. He learned early that the myth of a legend means everything to strangers and almost nothing when you're the child left sitting by the phone. And then there's the contradiction that would haunt any kid. The world celebrated John Lennon as a symbol of peace and love. Posters, anthems, documentaries, a halo in public, a silence in private. That mismatch dug under Julian Lennon's skin. It got worse as he watched his father dote on his younger half-brother, Sean Lennon. Headlines swooned over John Lennon, the devoted dad, but for Julian Lennon, it felt like a private erasure, like proof that the love he wanted was being spent somewhere else. Imagine being a teenager reading that the man the world calls a hero once hinted you were a mistake, while your brother was described as a child made of love. Even if those words were messy or exaggerated along the way, the damage was real. It settled like dust everywhere, all the time. After the divorce, contact with John Lennon became a patchwork. Awkward calls, stilted visits, promises that didn't quite land. There were flickers of hope moments where you catch a smile, a guitar passed down, a line of kindness, and then long stretches of nothing. So Julian Lennon did what a lot of wounded kids do. He built armor. If you don't expect anything, you can't be disappointed, right? Except you still are. Then came the day the world remembers. The headlines screamed, candles filled streets, songs played on repeat. John Lennon was gone, just like that. For Julian Lennon, the grief was complicated, quieter, heavier, tangled up with things never said. He'd spoken to his father days before, and for once, there was warmth. Maybe they were on the brink of fixing it, or at least understanding it. Then, nothing. No funeral to stand at, no goodbye to speak out loud. While millions mourned a hero, Julian Lennon mourned the father he never truly got to know. If the loss wasn't enough, the reading of the will felt like a final bruise. Almost everything went to Yoko Ono and Sean Lennon. Julian Lennon was left with a small provision and a very loud message. You're not really part of this story. Was it about money? That's the easy take. But beneath the headlines, it was about belonging, identity, and the right to say, hey, that's my father too. He fought for years, negotiations, headlines, sleepless nights, until a settlement was reached. People called him greedy. In reality, it was about not being erased. Through all of this, there was another tension. Quietly humming, Julian Lennon and Yoko Ono. She was the gatekeeper of his father's legacy, the person who changed the trajectory of his life in a single relationship. Public moments between them looked civil enough, stiff smiles, careful words, but for nearly 2 decades, the air stayed cold. Then, slowly, life did what life does. It softened edges, a photography exhibit, a conversation that didn't end in frustration, a need to keep things smooth for Sean Lennon's sake. The anger didn't bring peace, so Julian Lennon laid down the sword, not for approval, not for applause, but for sanity. No, they didn't become family in the warm storybook sense, but they found something workable, a fragile truce that allowed everyone to breathe. And that's where Sean Lennon becomes the unexpected anchor in this story. Two brothers, shaped by the same father in two very different homes, one loved loudly in public, the other searching for proof in private. With time, they found each other anyway, adult to adult. No PR, no headlines, just brothers. They shared memories, watched old footage, traded songs, and discovered that pain can be a bridge, not just a wall. That bond mattered more to Julian Lennon than continuing a feud that kept him stuck in one chapter. So, what do you do when the world wants you to be your father, and every step you take is judged against a legend? You change the game. Music gave Julian Lennon a voice, but the comparisons were relentless. Every chorus was weighed against a ghost, so he widened the frame: photography, writing, environmental advocacy, creative projects that felt like his. He stopped chasing the audience that demanded a second John Lennon and started building a life where Julian Lennon could exist without apology. Even as documentaries and nostalgic re-releases kept dragging the past into the present, he learned to carry the surname without letting it chain him to old heartbreak. Now, about that confession. When Julian Lennon admitted, in blunt, unguarded language, how deeply he'd hated Yoko Ono for years, it wasn't for shock value. It was the sound of a wall coming down, the kind of sentence you say when you've finally made peace with the fact that you once lived in a storm. Those few words held decades of sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and a lifetime of, "Why not me?" They also marked the end of something, the end of pretending, the end of polishing a story to make it easier to swallow. So, where does that leave us? With a simple, complicated truth. Julian Lennon grew up under a shadow he never asked for. He lost a father twice, once to a breakup, once to the world. He was forced to fight for his place in a story everyone thought they already understood. And yet, somewhere along the line, he found steadier ground. He didn't become a statue in his father's museum. He became himself, imperfect, resilient, creative, and finally, quietly, at peace. If this story made you feel something, if it nudged an old memory or softened a hard corner, stick around. There are more untold journeys behind famous names, more real lives beyond the spotlight. Drop a like if you're with us, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive, and tell me in the comments, which part of Julian Lennon's path hit you hardest: the fight to be recognized, the truce he made with Yoko Ono, or the brotherhood he built with Sean Lennon? Your story might help someone else find their own version of peace.